in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Fisher Investments. Fisher Investments' team of specialists tailor portfolios to each client's long-term goals. Learn more at FisherInvestments.com. Investments in securities involve the risk of loss.
Welcome to Friday. Welcome to a post-election edition of Week in Review. I'm your host, Bill Radke, listening to the voters with the help of KUOW politics reporter David Hyde. Hi, David.
Hey, Bill.
Political analyst, contributing columnist Joni Balter. Hi, Joni.
Hi there. Good to be with you in the studio.
And good to have you here. I'm going literally clockwise now in the room. Seattle Channel host and producer Brian Callanan. Thanks for being in the room.
Great to be here, Bill.
The room where it happens.
Yes.
And you can still stream, listeners, you can still watch the show because we've got our laptops up and you could watch us. Maybe you've become accustomed to seeing this on YouTube and Facebook. You still can. So happy Armistice Day to you all. Former name of Veterans Day. Did this election represent an armistice in America? Who knows? We all know that there was no red wave. We can say that.
Agreed.
Yeah.
What would you call it? A
red bust. How about
red
that?
bust, a red
blue
trickle,
wash. Red ripple. I saw in the New York Times. Yeah.
Ruby ripple. I
Yeah.
like that. Okay.
Red ripple. There's a bit of a blue wall there too. I think you could argue
A
in a
blue
few ways.
seawall
Yeah.
against the ripple, the rosy
It's actually a
rivulet.
mountain. It's a mountain range. That's
Pick
right
your
where it
metaphor.
hits.
Yep.
No, but that's right where it hits in the mountains. Snoqualmie Pass or
Yeah.
top of the Cascade, something like that.
Well, let's dissect this pink puddle.
Okay.
This
All right. Red and blue.
scarlet splash, if you will. Okay, so the blush bubble this week, the Dahlia dribble.
Keep it coming.
Let's just do that.
Yeah.
How about you tell me give me one sentence about what your pros. I'll start where I started. David, give me one sentence of what this election result was about.
I labored over this one. So this is my sentence. MAGA now stands for many Americans got annoyed about abortion rulings and election conspiracies.
Very good. Many Americans got annoyed.
Oh boy.
I like that.
Joni?
I like that.
One
Mine
sentence.
is everything the experts know is wrong.
It often is. Yes. Brian?
I think it's Democrats got organized. I saw it on the national front. I saw it on the local front here too, in our state, and certainly with some of the local races here, even the city and county races. I think you saw some impacts from that, and that had impacts up and down the ballot.
Democrats got organized. My sentence, because the candidates who claimed that the voting was rigged lost in Washington, my sentence is election deniers are denied election thanks to their election denial. How's that?
Not a river in Egypt.
Yeah. Right.
Wasn't it the Red Sea turning into the Red Trickle? There's some connection here between
Okay.
the Red Sea
Or
and the
parting
Red
the
Wave.
Red Sea.
Or
Parting the Red Wave.
Sea
Parting
being
the red
divided. Divided.
Okay,
Don't
so
do it.
before we jump in, not all the votes are counted. So are we about to embarrass ourselves?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's
Yes.
try to.
There's at least one race.
caveats do we need?
Well, one of them is, because this show airs on Saturday, I think,
Yeah.
is that there will be perhaps, and I doubt it, a decision in the very, very close 3rd Congressional District, or maybe not, because maybe we can talk about this a little bit.
This is
going to recount.
Southwest Washington, north of the Portland area. All that.
And there's another city ballot measure that could change today after we speak. So we have to be qualified in that way.
Yeah. I'd noticed though in that 3rd congressional district race, when we're talking about Joe Kent, Marie Gluesenkamp Perez, it looks like the votes that are left to count favor Gluesenkamp Perez. So we'll see where that goes, but that does look favorable for her. Certainly it's going to be a close one, but that's definitely something that a lot of people in our area and certainly Southwest Washington are paying attention to over the next couple of days here.
Yeah. The New York Times needle seems to keep getting that one a little bit wrong. It seems like they're a long way away from Washington State, but he gained like 126 votes in Clark County, where most of the votes are, I think, on yesterday's
Remaining,
draw.
yeah.
So even though he gained a lot of votes, that's where he's got to pick up more votes than he has been picking up so far, I think, if he's going to win. Right.
And just to bring the listeners along,
Please.
maybe everybody knows, but we should come out and state that this non-Puget Sound congressional election is fascinating and nationally important with the razor thin margins, Republicans trying to take the House. And we have the ousting of an incumbent, and Trump looms over it. Who wants to explain?
Well, I'll be happy to start. So the reason everybody's fixated on the 3rd district, it would be if Marie Gluesenkamp Perez wins, it would be the upset of the country. And there are probably a few others nationally that we're not going to address here. And the reason everybody's watching it is because we're down to really small numbers of House Republican advantage or House Democratic advantage, likely Republican, but just by very small. And this race has been teetering back and forth. And, it's long been like a Republican plus 4 or 5 points. But Joe Kent, the Republican in this case, is an election denier. So that's one point we really have to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And also will probably challenge any election if it doesn't go his way.
Yeah, and this is a story that we're seeing nationally, which is that these Trump-backed candidates didn't do well. Dr. Oz didn't do well, and Joe Kent, even if he ends up winning, underperformed that. Certainly Jamie Herrera Butler's performance in previous elections, even if he kind of squeezes it out here at the last minute. And this is a district and a year where Republicans are just looking at this saying, how could we possibly lose? And they're going, it's MAGA.
Yeah.
That's our problem here. They have to be asking themselves if a guy who I am comparing him to the James Joyce of conspiracy theorists. He just, it just streams of consciousness sort of out of him. Wow. One conspiracy theory after another kind of all jumbled together. And at some point, that stuff maybe is too much for independent and moderate voters in places like the 3rd.
James Joyce rolling over in his grave at that, but I know what you're getting into.
Give him
there.
A lot of reasons to roll.
Well, no, agreed. And I guess I just look at this one in terms of how an opposing party to the president's party performs in the midterm. This is the worst performance by that opposing party that we have seen in decades. And I think that's very telling. And it has a lot to do with MAGA, and people, I think, are tired of it in a lot of ways. And I think that's where we're headed with this election in terms of the aftermath of it.
Can I just add, Joe Kent said his objectives if he is elected: impeachment, oversight, and obstruction. And I would like to know, in what universe does that solve the problems of the people struggling, with inflation and many, many other things in the 3rd district? So that
we're talking so much about Joe Kent, understandably, but is Gluesenkamp Perez a great campaigner, a terrible campaigner,
I think that she's ran a really unconventional campaign. One of her most recent ads shows her with a chainsaw cutting down a tree. She owns and works in an auto repair shop, and
she's an axe throwing champion.
Talks about fixing things in her auto repair shop and then going to DC to fix things. She doesn't support an assault weapons ban. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, Seattle. That's a pretty disturbing, but contrary position to take. And so she was serious about trying to win in a Republican district, and if she pulls it off, definitely running that kind of campaign, I don't think you can discount it.
Total newcomer to politics.
Yeah. And
she ran once for the local council.
Okay.
Right. But has not served. And I just, in trying to jump it over to another district in the 8th district, with Schrier and Larkin.
That's news since Thursday night.
Yeah. It's been declared in support of Schrier. And I just picking up on your point there, David, I think there was that attempt by Kim Schrier to cross the aisle in a lot of ways, saying, hey, this is how many bills that I put forward that were approved by Donald Trump, that were signed by Donald Trump. There's the amount of bills they put forward that were signed by President Biden. So I think she was trying a more balanced approach that resonated with a lot more people because, again, Matt Larkin had a lot of different issues, was definitely a flamethrower when it came to some of his rhetoric there. So I'm seeing a lot of similarities between those two races for sure.
Well, can I just go back to how unconventional Marie Gluesenkamp Perez is?
Yeah.
She kind of reminded me, and I am a little fixated on this race back in Pennsylvania, of John Fetterman. And just being, you are one of us, I am one of you, was played out by her in all the ways that you all have just been describing. She was so, rural Democrat. Those are unusual, hard to come by, but they will attract, Republican voters who don't want to hear about MAGA anymore.
Yeah, although
it's pretty clear she did.
For Fetterman, the Republicans ended up running these attacks at the end, pointing out that he'd gone to Harvard,
And then he
So
lived,
some of his
lived off
they
his
lived
parents
off
for
his
a
parents,
while he was mayor of
received an
Radke.
allowance. They described it until he was 50 years old. So they managed to, through attack ads, I think, take him down a few notches on that. We didn't see those same kinds of attacks in the 3rd congressional district, but I don't know that it's a blueprint necessarily for success. These folks, if they're going to do it, they've got to be authentic.
They have to be
Yeah.
authentic.
Candidates.
Right.
Well, and the attack ads, I think about the Smiley and Smiley and Murray race for Senate there, and those attack ads were absolutely just vitriol from both sides. I think we have to agree there. And what turned into the most expensive Senate race in our state's history, too. $20 million on both sides there, from each side there. Then the PACs on top of that. So I don't know. I hope that this is a time in the aftermath of this election to take a deep breath and try to look at these different attack ads and say, pump the brakes here. I don't think it works.
Excuse me. I want to organize things a little bit for the
Please.
listeners
Please.
because we've
Yeah.
discussed
That makes sense.
we've discussed the 3rd district, which is still too close to call.
Right.
We did bring up the 8th district, where Kim Schrier has won re-election,
Mhm.
so she'll serve at least her 3rd term in office. What about, and by the way, the flamethrower, I think you said, Larkin has conceded the race graciously, right? It hasn't been a big kerfuffle, but what does this mean for the people, I guess in our earshot would be East King County, the people of the 8th district? How is their life going to be different because Kim Schrier is in office versus Matt Larkin? Do we know?
Well, I would say their life is going to be the same because she's still there and she has the values that she brings to that district. And as you said, Kim Schrier has spent her time, and especially in this campaign, trying to say, I hear you. I know who you are. Like, she spent time with agricultural folks in Eastern Washington. She made a big deal on her website of having a picture of herself with the sheriffs so that she didn't want to get tagged by that, any Democrat is responsible for all the crime that's running around. So I think, and also clearly, she's a doctor.
Yep.
She was very clear about the abortion issue, which, Washington is a very blue state. And in many places where it's not blue, it's libertarian. People here really, you can say this from so many votes, you could say it from a zillion of them, do not like having government telling people, and in this case, women, what to do with their bodies. Give me a break.
Yeah, I think abortion was the big issue in that, and the Tiffany Smiley, Patty Murray race for sure. And it probably wasn't the 3rd too, but a big issue in that race. And I was out talking to voters in Leavenworth and North Bend and some of these places where they don't sound like Seattle.
Right.
You meet a lot of people who kind of cut across the normal ideological boundaries. And I remember this older couple, full on MAGA Trump Republicans. And then when it came to the abortion issue, the woman said, "That's a woman's right. That's a woman's right." And the man was like, "That's right. That's a woman's right." So
Wow.
that libertarian streak is definitely out there. And I think it's got to have helped Schrier. Also, the fact that younger voters really turned out on that issue.
They did. And I guess my hope, Bill, in terms of what happens next year with that race and many others, is that we can take that deep breath and get past those different attack ads and do start focusing on these different issues like reproductive rights, et cetera, that I think a lot of the candidates at the end of the day are very concerned about. But in many ways, I know this happened in the Murray Smiley race. It felt like a back and forth type of response. If that ad comes out, well, I guess I better come up with this one. And it just became a back and forth that untenable from my perspective and just very difficult to listen to as a voter.
And I think a candidate like Schrier versus Larkin, what do voters get out of it? I think that they want out of it is kind of Perez's thing. I'm going to go to DC to fix things. They want functioning government.
Yeah.
And I think for Larkin, the problem was he tried to run away from the MAGA stuff as best as he possibly could, but those ads kept tying him to it. And I think that probably also really hurt him. What's he going to do when it comes to a federal abortion ban, for one thing? But I think there was also skepticism. What's he going to do when they just, start running all these congressional hearings and all kinds of stuff that doesn't have to do with actually functional government? So I think what people are hoping they get is government that functions. Now, whether or not they actually get that is a different thing.
Let me ask you about the U.S. Senate race, since we've brought that up a couple of times. It wasn't that close.
No.
Do the media
That is understatement.
exaggerate some campaigns' closeness consciously or unconsciously to get ratings? Were our listeners misled on what a tight race that Senate race was going to be?
So the media fell for the pollsters' narrative, and the pollsters were off. And I wish they'd all come clean and say, I made a terrible mistake.
Yeah.
They were so far off on the Murray race. so the Republicans come in here and spend something like $15 million to take Patty Murray from 17 points ahead in the primary to 13 or 12, whatever it is right now. I mean, that is a bad investment. So the media fell for what the pollsters were saying. And you know who the pollsters were missing? So this is how they do it. They do a formula for how many younger voters should be included, and sort of completely underestimated the anger among women of all ages, but especially younger voters. So they put in a number, I'm just guessing, but this is probably true, that they put in too low a number when they did their calculations for how many younger women and younger voters were going to go out and say no to this bit on abortion.
I guess I'd say on the flip side of that, I hear what you're saying. The pollsters were absolutely wrong on this, but in looking at the dollars that went into this race, we talk about these multi-million-dollar campaigns here and all the different attack ads that were being put out there. We saw Tiffany Smiley outgain Patty Murray towards the end of this race. And so I think if you're looking at the money in this race, which is not always the determinant of how these races are decided, but
the money's based on the polling, though.
True. And that's a fair point. But I guess what I'm saying is, as those dollars do come in and you see more of these ads, it kind of gets its own momentum there, Joni. It almost feels like one of those situations like, whoa, what are we starting here? Are these dollars actually going to determine the election? Dollars have done that before. Did they in this case? I don't think so.
Well, and the campaigns got it wrong too, right? Because all those fundraising appeals that you saw from Schrier, but also Murray saying it's 50-50. I mean, I don't know that they believe those polls, but they definitely,
you got to use it.
That's a good point.
They used them, but I definitely think they believed the ones that caused them to spend $20 million or whatever it was, plus on her campaign, running all of those attack ads. And the only thing that I would just to echo what Joni said, under 30 voters, it was the second highest turnout in the past 30 years. I looked this up. 63% going for Democrats nationally and 35% for Republicans for folks under 30. So just and abortion was a huge issue. But all of that said, I was with the Democrats on election night in Bellevue, and there was this celebration. There's no red wave, but I think we should also kind of say there was no blue wave either.
No,
that's
right.
And these polls weren't as wrong as some people want to make them out to be, in the sense that voters are concerned about the economy. They don't like Joe Biden that much.
Right.
They are concerned about inflation. And one of the reasons Patty Murray spent $20 million plus, independent expenditures, she knew that, right? And if you look at even public safety, which didn't turn out to be as big of an issue, certainly in these federal races, I think it's mostly because people liked MAGA a lot worse than all of these things that they didn't like. But if you go down to Portland and look at their city council race, they just elected a kind of law and order slate of candidates in a state where they also elected a very liberal Democratic governor because they didn't like the MAGA person, I think, who was running. So, there's some mixed messages at a minimum out there.
Well, one thing I want to speak to the content of some of the ads in the Senate race. Washington voters are very smart, and they don't like being talked down to, I don't think. And while I thought Tiffany Smiley was a really, really good candidate, I think it was sort of unbelievable to smart voters that somehow Patty Murray was responsible for closing the Starbucks on Capitol Hill, or Patty Murray by herself went out and raised gas prices. I mean, I just think voters are like, huh?
Yeah.
Like, really? You think I think that? Or you think that's even possible? Don't talk to me like that. I'm smarter than that.
Yeah. They didn't believe anybody was going to fix back gas prices. I think that, I talked to people, at least, who told me that they didn't think anyone was going to fix inflation particularly soon.
Getting real about it. And just looking at the younger voters piece, David, that really played out in Seattle too. And I don't know if we can jump onto some of those more localized races here, Bill, but I really saw that play out in terms of the candidates that came through here. And specifically, I'm looking at King County Prosecutor, which was basically just decided in the last 24 hours here. And you've got Leesa Manion going through, who was the chief of staff for Dan Satterberg, who's stepping down, but are not going for election again. And in looking at that, I really thought that based on the last election for city council, the last election for mayor, the last election for the city attorney's office, especially, I really thought that we would see Jim Farrell proceed there as more that law and order type of candidate there. He did not. And I really do think it's that young voter out there that was pushing the envelope on this, because young voters showed up in Seattle as well. And that's a big, big piece of this race.
I agree. Although the one thing I would say about that race is that if you were to compare it to Ann Davison's race in Seattle, it's pretty different. Leesa Manion is not Nicole Thomas Kennedy.
That's a truth. Yeah.
They're really different candidates. And so I never read, I think
just again, to help the listener out, I don't know how many people know all these are
the names. Yeah.
So in Seattle, you're saying, I made the same mistake. This was the biggest surprise to me this week, was the King County prosecutor election. And and I also, just like you, Brian, thought of Seattle's prosecuting attorney, Ann Davison, I guess a former Republican, but more of the sort of tough on crime image. A Republican. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So, and I expected, I'm always hearing from the King County suburbanites, they're terrified of Seattle because Seattle's a hellhole. And then King County went for someone who's considered to be less of a hardliner on criminals. And David, you're saying, well, that Ann Davison being elected in Seattle is not necessarily, it's not apples to apples. And Nicole Thomas Kennedy was a straight up abolition candidate.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yeah. And also Leesa Manion she's an establishment reformer, essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
She wants to see alternatives to incarceration. She's just, and I think what it says is people in King County, they don't like the level of mass incarceration that we have in our society, and they want to fix that too, but maybe they don't want to go as far as Nicole Thomas Kennedy.
Yeah.
So,
so I think it's all part of the same electorate.
Yeah.
Have they really changed?
Well, 2 points on that. First of all, Jim Farrell, I kept hearing his name and I knew a little bit about what he wanted to do, but he got out kind of late explaining what it was his intentions were. You didn't really hear his name even for a while, and then it was clear. But also, and Leesa Manion is exactly what you say, but the way a lot of people sort of thought about this was, look, she's trained by and works with Dan Satterberg. He's so moderate, she's not going to be Nicole Thomas Kennedy. She's just not. She's going to be more like Dan, even though she's probably to the left of Dan a little bit.
Yeah, and I really think she was trying to put forth a message of balance. We are going to make sure that we prosecute hardline criminals out there. We are also going to make sure that we work with these different type of progressive reforms, or this restorative justice piece that she was talking about quite a bit. So I think people saw that. I think people are concerned certainly about where the prosecutor's office is in King County and a backlog of cases there. That definitely came out in this election too. But I think at the end of it, when you look at who supported her, and that was basically a roll call of all the top people in King County in terms of leadership there. You look at Jim Farrell, he definitely had support in the outer areas of King County there, but he also had support from a number of the different police guilds, like the Seattle Police Guild, those different police unions out there. So I think there was at least a little bit of a difference in terms of their supporters. And that was something that voters probably looked at too.
I wonder if it is a little bit us or storytellers or whatever, because Ann Davison gets elected and it's just so like, oh my God, Seattle hasn't elected a Republican since the 1980s, things are really changing. And, you do get kind of seduced by those narratives maybe. And it's like, what are the chances that voters out there have really changed that much?
That's fair.
I think they like the nuance, of it's, like it's similar, reminds me of what Bruce Harrell said, I want more police. Oh my gosh, he wants more police. But then he counters with, I want the right kind of police. I'm not saying it's one way or the other. I'm saying it's complicated, which it is. It's very complicated.
It's so difficult to sell that nuance in an election, but you're totally right. I think that's a big,
but I think our voters are,
selling nuance on KUOW,
yeah, right?
Plus a T-shirt,
yeah,
nuance and a tote bag are up on offer on Week in Review. Let's take a little break, and we've got lots more election results to discuss after a short break on Week in Review. We're going to come right back.
Support for KUOW comes from the Trademarks and Intellectual Property Group at Ryan Swanson Law, celebrating 125 years in the Northwest. Lawyers helping business owners obtain, license, and enforce copyrights, trademarks, and domain names in the U.S. and throughout the world. Online at ryanswansonlaw.com.
On this week's On the Media, libraries, what they're after, and who's after them.
It's not about the book. It is about wanting the library itself to disappear.
The dream of accessing the knowledge of the whole world and the risk of losing it all. On the next On the Media from WNYC.
You can hear that Sunday night at 6 on 94.9 KUOW Seattle. It is 46 degrees in Seattle. Looks like it's going to be a cloudy afternoon with a slight chance of rain. 12:30.
You're listening to KUOW's Week in Review. Maybe you're watching it on YouTube or Facebook. Got the laptops on. I am in the studio with political analyst Joni Balter, Seattle Channel's Brian Callanan, KUOW politics reporter David Hyde. We're figuring out what the voters said this week. And in a few minutes, I do want to ask you all some questions of ethics, and I want to ask for some breathless speculation. We'll get to that, and that's going to be fun. First, we haven't gotten to some of the really interesting election results this week. For one thing, we do have, I believe this was just last night here talking live on Friday, that we had a concession in the Secretary of State election. And I don't know how big a deal that is. We've had a Republican Secretary of State for a long time, and now we are having the incumbent is a Democrat, Steve Hobbs, and the independent Julie Anderson conceded that election. Does it matter? Would one Secretary of State have done the job any differently from another?
Can I just jump in for a second here for the backstory on this? I thought it was very interesting. Julie Anderson running as a nonpartisan, Steve Hobbs running as a Democrat. And the way you saw the vote play out here, and it's very, very close, actually. It's just about 2 percentage points between them, or 3 percentage points between them. But you look at the write-in candidate portion of this, which isn't always that big of a number. It's close to 4% in this race here. And so the Republicans were pushing for Brad Klippert on a pretty low level type of campaign. He's the 8th district state representative out of the Kennewick area.
MAGA Republican.
You better believe
denier,
it. You better believe it.
Fraud claimer.
That's what I'm saying.
Pillowgate.
And so by having Republicans push for that candidate, that was that write-in candidate. Guess what they did? They just handed this election to the Democrats, I think, at least inadvertently. And I think that's an important part of this backstory.
And does it matter?
Right.
I think it does matter who is Secretary of State. And I think this has become, it used to be like this quiet job that moderate Republicans have done in the state for the last 40, 50 years. You never thought about them too much. Mm-hmm. But because Secretary of States have been and maybe will continue to be challenged for how they do their job, you definitely want somebody who has the skills to do the job there. I would say because Steve Hobbs, a very moderate Democrat,
I should point out that the incumbent is a Democrat because the Republican Kim Wyman left to go to the Biden administration.
Hobbs was appointed to the job.
He was appointed and now he's running for it. Yeah. And Steve Hobbs is known as a very, very moderate Democrat. And Julie Anderson ran as an independent. And so to me, this race came down to profile. And we need a skilled Secretary of State who makes it seem like they're not working as hard as they are. In other words, we don't need to hear about them too much. Just do the work, get it done. And so Steve Hobbs has been doing the job for that short period of time since Kim Wyman left. Julie Anderson, I have always liked Secretary of States. Most of them have come from being either election directors in counties or sometimes an auditor,
right?
But always that kind of profile where they know how to do elections. That's what we need.
Yeah. So we would have gotten it either way, is what you're saying.
Yes, in this case.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
In this case.
All right. David, in Seattle, there was a ballot measure to change the way we vote. So instead of just voting for one candidate, we could do it differently. What in the world have we learned? Can I start with you, David, on this? What did we learn from that voting result?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting one. So, I mean, so far, I think it's like 2,000 vote margins in favor of no to both of these things. 100%. And so the real question is, if the question going into it was, has Seattle ever met a voting reform measure it doesn't like? The answer may be no, because we love, top two primaries. We love
democracy
vouchers.
Yeah.
We love changing things up. And it could be in this instance that voters actually say, no, they don't want to make any of these changes. I suspect that that's actually probably not what's going on here, simply because not only did the Seattle Times say vote no, but the Stranger of all places said vote no, because I think, were holding out for a statewide ranked choice voting measure. This is one of the two options we have, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think ultimately maybe we end up with some version of ranked choice voting either now or sometime in the future, but maybe for now, it'll be no to both.
Well, I agree with you. We love reform too much without even thinking about what is going to be the long-term impact of this. For example, is King County, stretched thin on counting votes in general? Is King County going to be able to do ranked choice voting if that's what happens?
Because they have to retool the machines.
They have to redo a lot of stuff. And at a time when elections are under fire, why would we do this? There's what is the problem we're trying to solve here? And I was really, frankly, glad to see the voters were leaning by not much. No, I heard people talking about this and they'd say, I don't get this. And if you read it, or if you read it aloud, you go, huh? I have to say yes or no. But even if I say no, I still have to hang in here and pick one of these things that I don't even understand how it works or how they're going to count it. Yeah. I just thought it was like, I think a lot of people just threw their hands up and said, get out of here. No.
I think the overall idea, and ranked choice voting at least, emerged as the favorite for people with that 1A, 1B portion of this by more than 70% of the vote. So approval voting, which was the first measure that was going to be on ballot. Then you remember late in the game, the Seattle City Council said, we're going to pave the way for approval voting, or
Again,
excuse me, ranked choice voting.
Brief pause for listeners.
Please.
Ranked choice voting means you would get to rank multiple candidates in order of how much you prefer them.
Top five.
Yep.
Top five. Thank you. Approval voting, which is the other option, means you can just fill in a bubble for every candidate you favor.
That's right. That's right. And just thank you for that back step there. And I guess just in looking at how this all played out, this was a situation where it's very close in terms of that vote here. But also, this was a vote that was not close in San Juan County and Clark County, because those jurisdictions voted on approval voting too, and they resoundingly defeated it. So I hear what you're saying, Joni. I don't think people are necessarily ready for it, but there are 50 plus jurisdictions that do this around the country. The idea is to try to take the political party's power out of these different
about ranked
elections.
choice there.
I am.
50.
I am.
Because the other one, the approval voting, is like in North Dakota and St. Louis.
Yeah, two
to
locations.
which I say,
Fargo.
Yeah.
Why do we want to be like them? Don't we lead the way in, sturdy elections and good voting and good government and all this stuff? Why do we want to be like them? Explain it.
As the neutral political reporter here, what they say, right? The approval voting folks say, and so do the ranked choice voting folks say, is that this is going to increase overall voter satisfaction. And they point to a political science study that I read that actually showed that it was the second most satisfying way of voting. The idea being, you end up being more likely to have in some fashion voted for the candidate who ends up winning, even if it wasn't your first choice.
And you get to give more information about what you're thinking.
Yeah,
that's right. Feel good.
That's right. It's got to feel good. But it's sort of interesting, right? And I don't know if it's kind of paradoxical, but it's kind of this abstract concept of voter satisfaction, like almost a therapeutic function in terms of voting versus outcomes. And with some of these other reforms, I mean, including democracy
that day,
including democracy vouchers, have we really seen a change when it comes to the outcomes, which is what I would think would matter most to voters? And, so that's the question here, whether we get ranked choice or approval voting, or we stay with the one we have right now. How do you think, Brian, it'll actually change outcomes?
I think it may. And just another quick backstory here too. King County is working on this. The King County government's working on this to potentially introduce something like ranked choice voting over this next session here next year. Also, the state legislature has this local options bill where different local jurisdictions could actually choose this. That's been kicked around for about the past 7 years there. So it's something that's in the works right now. And I think trying to start this at the city level, Seattle being the
reformer.
Yeah, I guess reformer.
Laboratory.
That's I was going with mixing bowl, but I like the laboratory a lot better. That idea there that Seattle can start this and then see it happen on a larger level is important. I think with regard to how it would be different, there's also this idea that it would attract new candidates, diverse candidates, different candidates that people may not have seen before.
But you're saying we're not seeing that. We had 26 candidates that one year and 13 mayoral candidates in the last election. And after democracy,
you want 30
and I think
40?
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying democracy vouchers helped add to that diversity, and this is potential.
Well, the number of mayoral candidates went down.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I was looking more closely at the council races there, because those continue to increase in terms of the amount of.
There are a lot, and they have more money to play with. That's
true.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, can we just? There's one thing here that we didn't mention. So the folks that put forward approval voting wanted more moderate candidates. Theoretically, that's how they described it. And the city council rushing this through in the middle of the summer when nobody was paying attention, and they did rush it through, seemed to want to say, well, ranked choice gives you more progressive. And so what I sort of object to is this gaming of it. I don't like that. Like, oh, you're really going to go in and change the way we do the election to benefit one kind of candidate or the other?
Can I ask you about, this is a related question. It's one of the big questions I wanted to ask you about democracy itself. What if, so we had, because Joni, I think you were the one who said, it takes long enough to count the votes. Now you're going to, have the county have to redo its, or the city have to redo its system. It does take a long time to count votes. What are the odds that if there's so much hue and cry about that every time, oh God, it takes so long. What if we just didn't announce the results until all the votes were counted? Wouldn't that solve a lot of problems? Do you think that would ever happen?
It's like Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to wait.
Yeah. You do have to wait, but I think
what's the downside of that?
I just think
it's just more fun.
There's so much pressure from different news organizations to get those results as
We
soon
are
as
the
possible.
news organization.
I know.
What if we
But
stop?
what would inspire us? What would inspire us to know less than we already know
But
on
you
election
wouldn't
night?
act- but you
Why
don't-
would we want that?
Because when you knew anything, it would be the results instead of the not results. In fact, how much drama is there when someone who thinks they're winning turns out to be losing?
You're talking about delayed gratification, and that is not the American way, Bill. I hate to say it. But I think that's a piece
Well,
of
I mean, the other issue is what are Joe Kent folks falsely claiming, is happening down there? Lack of transparency. They don't know everything that's happening. This would be just one more,
Well, there was even somebody talking about we should stop counting votes at a certain time. That would not work for this. And also Joe Kent, and this is weird, told his voters to vote as late as they could. So he was, while he's criticizing the whole system, not this specifically, urging people to make it as late and sort of questioning as possible as you count the votes late.
Yeah.
Can I say something about that?
Okay.
Do you mind? Well, two funny things. Just one, how's that working out for them?
Right.
We've got a vote by mail system that's really efficient. Apparently, because I called Cowlitz County this week, and voting is down compared to the last midterm election, in an election that there's a lot of interest in. And Cowlitz County is the most Republican county, I believe, in the 3rd congressional district.
It's down in King County too.
Often Lewis is more conservative.
But guess what? Tons of people showed up election week demanding replacement ballots, and the auditor and all of her staff, skilled staff, had to spend all of election day replacing ballots and not counting ballots. So one of the reasons why voting was delayed this year may have been MAGA candidates saying, show up on election day, ask for a replacement ballot to avoid
who your
fraud.
county auditor is and who your secretary of state is so important.
It matters,
because people are really messing with their heads.
Yeah.
Okay. One more thing on that. If you didn't know who was winning, quote unquote winning, which is a mirage. No one is pulling ahead or falling behind. It's all just counting. If you didn't know, then you wouldn't even know whether you should be contesting this election, because you might be winning the election. You'd be peeing on the election that is about to put you in office.
Right.
What if we just waited?
Yeah.
You said, why is everybody so quiet? Because the races are so close.
Yeah.
They're going, I don't want to, challenge it if I'm going to win it.
You can run a ballot initiative. I don't know if you could stay at KUOW if you're going to do that, but
that would be my last.
Your last act.
I would fund my retirement by. Didn't Tim Eyman used to make money doing things like that?
There you go.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, he's
Don't
losing
say-
that money.
Yeah,
right now.
yeah.
Don't say his
Yeah.
name too often. He
Yeah.
usually shows up.
yeah, just leave the chairs where they are.
Yeah. Right. Oh, good.
Lock them down.
Yeah.
Okay, we're getting toward the smaller, but yet I think very interesting things. I've heard a lot about abortion being determinative, which I have no doubt about. We've talked about young voters. I haven't heard a big narrative of climate change being a big deal, but when we say young voters, because we've already said that the pollsters are so wrong, they don't know what they're talking about. So, but yet when we hear, but then we confidently say, oh, it was about this or about that. If it's young voters, did anyone think that these young voters are a wave that don't trust Republicans when it comes to the world they're going to still be alive in burning down?
Yeah.
It didn't, register as a big issue like abortion, but I think it's built in like you're suggesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do think that's very much part of their lives.
They're mostly Democrats.
Yeah.
And that clearly is a difference between the parties.
Maybe gun control being another issue there that's important to young people.
Yes.
That's certainly something I'm thinking about.
I'm glad you brought that up, gun control, because we haven't discussed yet how the Washington state legislature there was also no red waves for our state legislature. In fact, it looks
Might have
like
been a blue blip.
Blue.
the
Yeah.
Democrats are going to
Gain some seats.
gain
Blue
some
blip.
seats
Yeah.
in the majority. It's a
Huh.
blue blip.
Mhm.
So my question is, again, I always want to go to that. What does the listener care about that? What are they going to notice if the state legislature is slightly bluer? What will change in their lives?
I feel like they might be more emboldened to really work towards that state constitutional amendment enshrining abortion rights. I think that would be a big message out of this election. I think maybe they were waiting for some of these results possibly. So that's something I'd definitely be keeping an eye on.
I think you could see more on housing and homelessness, as the governor's been talking about, more spending on that. And I definitely think this could be the year, this upcoming year, for an assault weapons ban. We have done some gun control here by legislation, more by initiative. But I could see that making it the year to do that, because you have some of those Democrats in purple districts who won't vote for it. But if you pad the totals, you can see it happening.
How frustrated are you if you are a Washington state Republican? You must just feel like you've got no voice. You're thinking about, how can I join the Eastern Oregon counties who are going to join Idaho?
I guess. Yeah. And I mean, you talk about gaining some of these seats in the state house and the state Senate there. That's been happening since 2016. So this is something that's been steadily going on over the past several cycles here. And it just happened again in the midterms here in 2022.
It's nothing new. I mean, when Republican Rob McKenna ran against Jay Inslee,
Right.
I can't remember, somebody said, maybe we should just all move to Texas when he lost to Jay Inslee back then, because implying that like McKenna, who comes across as moderate for Republican,
Yes.
And as a member of what is the mainstream Republicans of Washington, that was their best shot, kind of thing, was how they felt. And since then, who have we had? Lauren Culp last time. We'll see. But anyway, yeah.
Well, first of all, Rob McKenna would not like Texas politics the way they are. I mean, he's made that very clear. But I think the message anyway to the Republican Party as it goes forward is run different candidates, really hold candidate school if you have to, make it so people understand that this is a blue state, but it's also a sort of like, eat your peas sensible place. If you offered a compelling enough Republican candidate who was not anti-choice and sort of just more moderate, not into MAGA, not into challenging elections, they'd have a chance. The voters aren't that, they're not, Western Washington is, but the whole state collectively, I can see the state electing Republicans if they're moderate.
I guess the push there being Lauren Culp really pushed himself into that role. He is not who the state Republicans wanted in that for that candidate 2 years ago. So I think that's a piece of this too. I mean, finding the candidates is great. When we talk about MAGA fever and whatever you want to call it, I think a lot of people supported him. He had those big rallies, et cetera. And that's who the candidate ended up being.
This is kind of former Republican Party Chair Chris Vance's message too.
Yes.
He actually ran this time as an independent. He's got this idea that the Republican brand has been so badly tarnished by Trump that they've got to branch out on their own. And he didn't do well, I don't think, in that race.
He was proven right overall, but lost his own campaign.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay.
Chris was running in some ways to prove that, a moderate independent could actually win against, right-wing Phil Fortunato down there in the Auburn area, I think. And Chris has a big name. I mean, people know him from being the Washington State Republican Party chair for a number of years. They know him from being in the legislature for a long time. And he's run a lot. He's run for Congress a couple times. So I don't know that the message would actually be true.
No.
If he won, because he has name familiarity like crazy.
Okay, we're about to take a break. So the advice to Republicans is candidate school. I like that. School of rock, the vote, school of something. Well, I'm working on that. Okay. The before we take a break, will local and state Democrats, you said maybe there's a constitutional amendment regarding abortion, because I was wondering, in states like Michigan where abortion was on the ballot, the Democrats swept lots of races. I was wondering why Democrats didn't and won't always push some kind of referendum on, privacy, doctor privacy, a constitutional amendment, just get abortion onto the ballot. Is that about to happen? And I don't know why it didn't already.
I could see where they would do it. They didn't have time from June 24th, the Supreme Court ruling.
Okay.
The initiatives were due like in 8 days. You cannot even get a ballot title in that time to get it there.
Got it.
Yeah, I think there was enough concern about how these different congressional races would go that maybe there was a little bit of a pumping of the brakes there. But I would certainly see something from our state delegates here over the next couple months.
Okay, I still after we come back from a break, I want to ask you, what is cynical? And maybe if we have time, we've been so local, as is our mission, our brief on this show, but I'm still kind of curious what you think about Trump's announcement on Tuesday and Warnock and Walker. I don't know if we'll get to that or not. Let's find out. Take a short break. Right back with Week in Review.
Support for KUOW comes from Solid Ground, working to provide housing and prevent housing loss, hosting the Social Justice Salon, Untangling the Safety Net, featuring people with lived experience and those working on systems change. November 15th at Town Hall. Details at tinyurl.com/sgjustice.
Hey, my name's Claire McGrain, and I'm a producer for Seattle Now, KUOW's local news podcast. Every weekday morning at 6, our team of journalists and producers share the most impactful stories affecting our region, all in under 15 minutes. Learn something new and connect with our city by searching for Seattle Now wherever you get your podcasts.
Support for KUOW comes from UW Medicine, celebrating the new Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center, an independent organization that serves as UW Medicine's cancer program, bringing cancer care and research closer together to help benefit patients. More at uwmedicine.org/cancer.
This is KUOW's Week in Review. I'm your host, Bill Radke. We have KUOW's David Hyde, political analyst Joni Balter, Seattle Channel's Brian Callanan. We're covering the big election results this week. And I want to know now, nationally, the MAGA and locally, generally, the MAGA Republicans, here was the big ploy. The Democratic Party boosted some MAGA Republicans, right? Tried to get them onto the ballot so that they could run against extremists. And nationally, it worked every time for the Democrats. It was very controversial. It was called cynical. That's a cynical thing to do, to be amplifying these MAGA candidates. If it worked, is it still cynical?
I think it's very cynical. I don't like it. One of the best examples of it was in Pennsylvania, where Josh Shapiro, who's about to be the new Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, put money in during the primary to get the very, very, very MAGA Doug Mastriano to be the candidate, and then he beat him handily. So it worked, but I don't like it as a strategy. I think.
But there's a difference. Is it cynical or is it just risky? What if you let's say you genuinely, idealistically, heartfeltedly think that this is going to put Democrats in office? What's cynical about that? It just sounds risky.
It feels like an ends justify the means kind of question to me. And I don't know.
Is it tricky? Is it manipulative? Is it lying? Is that
it feels dishonest?
It's politics. Come on.
It's dishonest.
I mean,
he's not for him.
Yeah.
He's
right.
not for Mastriano, in case it goes the other way.
Okay.
It's dishonest.
Yeah, I mean, they were hoping Joe Kent would be the nominee in the third, I'm sure, here in Washington, and they might actually pick up a seat as a result of it. So it was obviously effective. I would say the other thing is what it did is it put Trumpism, it put MAGA on the ballot. It put conspiracy theories and extremism on the ballot. This was a referendum election in many ways on that stuff. And maybe that was a good thing for the country.
Yeah, try to put it behind us somehow. That's a great point.
That is a great point.
Okay, we're steering toward the end of our hour together. I'll just make some little notes. You can toss in a sentence if you want. I haven't seen a school, parks, transportation, or emergency services levy that has failed. Maybe some are close, maybe some will fail, but if trust in government apparently is doesn't seem to be dead.
Thurston County needs some help with its fire department, but keep going, Bill.
Wow.
Yeah, just thought I'd throw
that
it
is
out there.
amazing.
It's out there.
That
It's
is
out there.
impressive
Yep.
that you knew that reference.
The rest of the state is like Canada, but not.
Yeah,
right.
Watch out.
Tukwila voters raised the city's minimum wage to $19 to match C-tax. I have a non-local election question. I just want breathless speculation. I want to know, do you think Donald Trump is going to announce his presidential candidacy on Tuesday? And if so, either way, what do you expect in the Warnock runoff,
Right.
Walker runoff that could tip the Senate one way or the other?
It seems like there's a lot of pressure for Trump to wait until that runoff election.
Right.
Wait till the results are known. Will he? I don't know. It just doesn't seem like he's in a great space right now in terms of,
Yes.
burgeoning support behind him. So
Yeah.
I guess waiting would be one way to play it.
Well, he's not known for his self-restraint, perhaps.
Okay.
And so I think he probably will announce, and I think it hurts Herschel Walker.
Yeah.
And I think, the Democrats would be cheering for Trump to go, spend the rest of the month in Georgia.
Right. Because that third party candidate in that Warnock Herschel Walker race, I mean, I would think that they would start leaning their way towards Warnock, but I don't have a great feel for that. But it's such a tight race. It's that third party, take that out. And where do those votes go? I think that's what you have to try to add up now.
Okay. Do you care, David?
No, I'm just agreeing. I'm just nodding. With all that. I agree with all
Nodding on the radio.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay, I have Baroque theories about Trump and DeSantis and all that, and why Trump is going to announce his candidacy, but I think he will. But that means nothing. Let's talk about something that means something, which is a smile at the end of every week, every show. What happened this week that made you smile? Who wants to begin?
I'll throw one out there.
Yes.
I just wanted to give a shout out, and I was smiling with regard to a new system, the Native and Strong Crisis Lifeline. It's part of the 988 call system.
Right.
Just went into effect yesterday. It's something that is run by and is for Native American people in our community that are dealing with crisis. That's an ethnicity that has some of the highest suicide rates of any in our country. And I was smiling at that, and way to go, Rochelle Williams. Great program involved there.
Very good.
The airwaves are a little clearer. The TV ads going away.
Oh,
I
yeah.
wanted to give you time because yours is
Oh,
better.
no, just the
Here he goes.
satirical attacks on Elon Musk, new owner of Twitter,
Yeah.
are just making me smile one after the other. Some of which I was just looking at, and I'm not going to say them on the radio, but here one that purports to be the Washington State Department of Natural Resources. And
Oh,
of
they're
course,
funny.
part of the thing is I'm not even
funny.
sure if this is them or not now, which is the whole point. This one says, update, the Twitter wildfire is at 44 billion acres and 0% contained.
Wow.
Do you know I was using that Twitter feed because it's so good. It's
So
so
great,
funny as an
yeah.
example of how to do it.
How to do it
Twitter
right.
feed in
There's
my
some
class.
smart people on that one with
That one's
DNR.
really
Yeah.
good.
Listeners, if you don't know what's going on with Twitter, which Elon Musk now owns, people are fake. It has to do with his verification, selling verification. So people are posting as if they're people who they're not, and some of it's hilarious.
Thanks, Bill.
You're welcome. Giuliani is some of that stuff is non-pareil. And I will just say I'm smiling because the late Paul Allen's art collection sold for $1.5 billion. I picked up a Cézanne myself.
Why not?
That I plan
Why
to throw
not?
soup on, so I feel good about that.
Yeah.
And pretty soon his estate's going to sell the Seahawks. So that's going to
Wow.
be interesting.
Wow.
I assume Russell Wilson buys it, but I don't know.
Oh, boy.
Second act for you, Bill. Right
Yeah,
there.
thank you.
Yeah.
We got to go. We got like 10 seconds left. It's just time to say thank you so much. Fascinating week, fascinating conversation. And thanks for being Week in Review this week, everybody.
Thank
Bill.
you.
Thanks, Bill.
That's Joni Balter, political analyst, contributing columnist, Seattle Channel host and producer Brian Callanan, KUOW politics reporter David Hyde, and the show's produced by Kevin Kniestat. We get social media and live streaming help from Juan Pablo Chiquiza and Tio Popescu. And it sounds as good as it does because of Bernard Ouellette on the board. And we'll see you again in a week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.